slowly rolling into it, and off of corner number 4. It's showtime at Skagit Speedway. It's showtime!
One car with the front of it that was junk, and another car with the back of it was junk. So I cut both of them in half, took the good part of one car and the good part of the other car, and welded them together.
Racing, and next thing you know, she's on the flag stand running the, doing flag, and all my quarterback. I'm like, where did you come from?
I hope they just soak it all in, because you don't know when it could be over.
Little crazy Martin looks over, he goes, "Are we going 100 mile an hour? I've never gone 100 mile an hour before in my life."
And I just looked at the track and I said, this is absolutely gorgeous. This is a beautiful facility. He says, you think so? And I said, it is. And he says, my name is Jim Raper.
No pressure, just win.
Well, welcome into this week's edition of On the Gas, a Skagit Speedway podcast. Blake Anderson, Erik List back here with you. And this week we're joined by Steve Beitler, former Skagit Speedway track owner, former car owner and racer at Skagit Speedway. Steve, thank you so much for taking some time. Happy holidays as we record this on December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, and then 2 days before Christmas. So thanks for taking some time to spend your holiday up here with Blake and I. And how you been, sir? It's good to see you.
Well, first off, thanks for having me, guys. This is really a joy, and I'm doing good. Yeah, I've just got home, been in Mexico for the last month, and getting ready to start my Christmas shopping this afternoon. We get through here and kind of get on with the Christmas season and, get up to speed.
You're ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
See, I was going to say you have to hurry.
Usually I start tomorrow morning, but I'm trying to eliminate some of the stress.
Well, I'm excited for this, Steve. I mean, I've known you for a while now. You and I karaoke partners at Chili Bowl through the years, and we've had some good times down there, and this is going to be a good chat. We've got a lot to talk about, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we're doing this. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I look forward to it. So let's kind of just dive into it. Kind of thinking chronologically, we'll probably jump around. But first of all, what is your background in racing, your background in Skagit Speedway? You grew up here. How did you first kind of come to Skagit Speedway? I know you came at 3 months old.
Well, my dad and my uncle back in the 50s raced around the Northwest before Skagit Speedway was even thought of. And when they started building the track, of course, they relied a lot on volunteer help, and several people came up and, volunteered their time to help carve out the oval. And my dad and uncle were one of them that spent a fair amount of time up here actually helping build the track. And then they both raced in the first race they had in Labor Day 1954. So it was just a natural progression. I was born in February of 59, and 3 months later, here I was at the racetrack, and it's just something that, they say it's just born into your blood, and I believe that because at the last race they had the year before, they always used to do a powder puff. Well, my mom drove the powder puff race that night, and she was pregnant with me and didn't realize it. She didn't know she was pregnant at the time, and so I don't know, maybe that's why I like racing so much, but Skagit Speedway has always been my second home, and even when I was real little, I wanted to be here all the time, and it was just a place that I would come up to as a young kid, and then of course my dad drove here until 61 or so, and then he became the flagman, and then he was announcer for a few years, and he took over the photography and stuff, and then Jim Raper told him one time, why don't you put up a little souvenir stand up here and sell your pictures and some souvenir stuff. So my dad actually put together the first souvenir stand they had up here, and then I went to work up here when I was about 8 years old, and selling programs and then picking garbage up at the end of the night, and just anything I could do to be involved.
So is that some of your first memories, about 8 years old here, that you can vividly remember being here at Skagit?
I remember, I can still remember, it's crazy because I was only about 2 years old, but I can still remember sitting in the stands with my grandparents and then pointing out my dad on the racetrack when his last year of racing. I remember looking down, and so that's kind of the only memory I have back when I was real young. But then the next memories is, when you're 5, 6, 7 years old, coming to the racetrack and just watching the races. And of course, back then, as soon as the races are over, you run down the pits and you run around and look at the race cars. And, if they're pushing them on a trailer, you always try to jump in there and help push them on the trailer and things like that.
Besides your dad, did you have a favorite race car driver growing up in Skagit, whether it was Skagit or whether it was national?
When I was real young, I liked Charlie Gibbs. He was from Cedar Wool. He drove a blue number 22 car. So, and as kids raced our bicycles, we had a little open field across the street from my house. We'd race bicycles over there, so I made a little number on the front and drew the 22 like his, and he was sponsored by Howell's Drive-In, and I put that on there. So Charlie was kind of my favorite driver growing up, and then, as time progressed on, it got into more of the national level people, and, obviously the first time the Outlaws came out here in 78, I raced against them, and that's when I first saw in person Doug Wolfgang and Steve Kinzer and Sammy Swindell, and, immediately, that's who I wanted to be.
Was that kind of surreal for you seeing those guys first in person and racing against them?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And, I was in a heat race and I had an old super modified, probably weighed 2,500 pounds or whatever. And Doug Wolfgang lapped me twice in my heat race, but I was so happy I got to race against Doug Wolfgang, and he actually won the Outlaw Dirt Cup race that year. And I reminded Doug of that. I said, "You lapped me twice," and he just laughed.
That would have been, I think, the Speedway Motors car year. He'd have been in the 4X, I believe, in 78.
Yeah.
Speedway Motors car.
Yeah, I believe he was in the 4X in 78.
Speedy Bill's car. Yeah. Do you remember the start of Dirt Cup, like in 72 when Dirt Cup was coming around? I know you were 13, but was it a big deal when Dirt Cup started?
Well,
to
yeah,
get all
because
his names here?
The amount of money he was going to pay. It seemed like the first Dirt Cup, it was either $1,000 or $2,000 he was going to pay. And I remember comments were made that people from California came up. They're going, "Oh, there's no way you can pay that much money to win that thing." And Jimmy Gordon came up that year, and I don't remember all the names now, and then Ross Faunis goes out and beats him. The local guy driving the Gray Ghost, I think that's what they called it back then. It was Jimmy Collier's car, and Jimmy was just an ingenious guy back in the day. He invented so much stuff. He built his own steering boxes. He was a real innovator. But Ross Faunis won that race. It's like, our local guy won it.
And then we had to wait until another 20 years for a local to win.
Yeah, it took a long time,
Burroughs, 92.
because once everybody in California figured out that, Jim Raper wasn't lying when he said he's going to pay this much money. And, every year he always wanted to put a little more money into it. And he told me, he says, it's got to grow every year or it stays the same. So every year he'd put more money into it. And, the guys from California back in those days, they were way more advanced with their technology, their pieces, their parts, their motors. Everybody up here, most of the people up here would build stuff, themselves in their shop. And it wasn't until later on, I think it was Lloyd Army was one of the first ones, him and Rocky Ingen and somebody else was one of the first ones to actually buy kit cars. They were buying Tognottis, and Keith Jensen, and he bought a Bob Trossel car. Yep. These are all in the mid-70s, around 76, 77. And in fact, Rocky Ingen had the last Tognotti car that had a bolt-on roll cage, and Lloyd had the first weld-on. And they got them literally within a month of each other. And that's kind of the transition on the car then. But so before that, everybody would build their own stuff up here, and the California guys would come up and, give us a lesson every year.
Yeah, because, that was the late 60s when the bolt-on cages kind of became controversial with IMCA, because it was, I can't remember who passed away after they won the Nationals. I think 67. I'm blanking on the name right now, and I don't know why, because ask me in 2 hours and I'll be able to tell you the name. But he won the Nationals, and then 2 weeks later went over, I think, to Lincoln and lost his life, and that's when IMCA started to mandate the bolt-on cages.
A lot of guys didn't like it. There's a lot of racers that fought the cages on them. They said that, leave the cages off. That's how we're supposed to race.
Cages are for monkeys. Yeah. I remember that was a famous shirt that was, you see a lot of pictures in the 60s and 70s of guys wearing that to sport car races. The
sad thing is we don't have a lot of heroes from the 50s and 60s that live very long, because, they go out and win a big major race, and the next day die at, Langhorne or somewhere going over the fence. And it's, safety is just, as the cars get faster and faster every year, you've got to keep up with the safety innovations.
It's crazy when you look back to that time and you see the tires those guys are running on. They're 4 inches wide.
4 or 5 inches wide. And, the technology's really changed.
Just had a hoop behind them, basically, as the roll cage.
Well, they first started out, they didn't have seat belts, because they said, if this thing tips over, I want out. That was the theory. That's why you look at all your old pictures in the 50s and stuff. Guy will be tipping his car over, and the guy's flying through the air, spread eagle, going over the fence into the trees. And Yeah, it was pretty crazy era back then.
So what was your first car like in 1977? About was when you start racing, correct?
Yeah, I started when I was a freshman in high school. I got my first, actually it was my sophomore year. I bought a pickup when I turned 16, and I bought a pickup because I knew someday I was going to have a race car and I need something to tow it with. Well, there's a guy in high school. He was a senior, Gerald Steffen, at the time, and I found out he was building a race car. So I went and said, hey, I got a pickup if you ever need somebody to tow your race car. And all he had was a Camaro. So I started crewing for him, and he built that first car. And then I knew I wanted a car. So Ed Blanton had this old car. Actually, Lloyd Army built the frame for him, and it was sitting behind his garage. And I wanted to buy it. And he goes, well, I'm not going to just give it to you. And I don't remember. He either charged me $75 or $100 for it. And literally, I had to take his lawnmower and mow down the grass to get to it. It was all grown up around it. But I had to make payments because I think I had $25 or something then, and made payments on a $100 car. And it was just basically a frame and front axle and the old tin body that was on it. And I took that, and my senior year in high school, that was my class project for my senior year, was building that race car. And I took it to school and, cut a bunch of it apart. And I built the drive line, shortened a longer drive line, and built the rear end housings and built as much stuff as I could, and started racing in 77. And, it wasn't a very nice race car, but it was mine. And I think I had about $900 into it when I hit the track.
Wow, that's impressive. And I think I saw on your LinkedIn, were you earning money to build that race car from milking cows?
Yeah, I went to work when I was 11 years old, back when they let kids work in this area. I went to work at Herb Chevron in Cedar Woolley, and I worked there for about a year and a half. And then one of our customers was John Maurer. He had the big dairy farm up on the Northern State Hospital grounds. So I went to work for John when I was 12 and a half years old or something then. I worked for him all the way through high school, and bucking hay and cleaning stalls, feeding cattle. And then I got to milking cows because it paid better money milking the cows. So I'd go up and milk cows in the morning before school, come home and go to school and turn out for football or baseball. But that's how my dad didn't want me to race. I told him once I wanted a race car, and he jumped right on me. He said, you're not going to race. It's too damn expensive. Just get that out of your mind. So I couldn't tell my dad I was building a race car. He thought I was over working on Gerald Steffen's car the whole time, and I was literally building a car right next to his. So, every dime I get my hands on was going into that race car and trying to buy pieces and parts.
What were you making back milking cows?
It was $25 a shift, and the shift, I'd have to go up there and get the cows in about 3:30 in the morning, and then we'd start milk, and we'd get done about 7 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd run home and shower. So it was, 3.5 hour, 4 hour shift sometimes.
Pretty good payback.
That's
then,
not bad, yeah.
$25. That's why I wanted to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you look back then. I remember my dad telling me in high school, he's just 2 years younger than you, like $2.35 an hour.
Well, when I worked on the farm, I worked at Herb Chevron. I got $1 an hour, and after 1 year, he gave me a raise to $1.25. Well, then John was in there getting gas one day, and he said, hey, if you're ever looking for a job, I could use a hard worker like you. And I says, well, what's the pay? He goes, $1.50 an hour. So I was making $1.50 an hour on the dairy farm, but that's why milking the cows paid so much better. So that's why I wanted to milk. But then I'd go out, when I wasn't going to school, I'd be out, feeding cattle, cleaning stalls, work. There's no such thing as getting paid overtime back in those days. You just worked as many hours as you could work to make money.
Do you remember telling your dad about the race car, how that went?
Yep,
Telling your mom and dad how'd that go?
Well, my mom, she lived down in Seattle, so she knew about it ahead of time, but her and my dad didn't really communicate. But went to graduation night, and my dad drove me to graduation night because they have a big party afterwards, and there's, you don't want to be driving graduation night. So we left the high school, and we're headed back home because I wanted to change out of my nice clothes. And we drove right by my friend's shop. I said, hey, pull in here for a minute, would you? He goes, don't you spend enough time tonight? I said, just pull in here. So we walked in. I flipped the lights on. My car was sitting there, all painted with my name on it. My helmet was painted, sitting on the hood. I said, what do you think? And he looks at me. He goes, I thought you were up to something. And then he started walking around. And, the first thing he says, he goes, you got new seat belts in this thing? I said, brand new, Dad. Everything's good to go. And he was pretty surprised, but I figured, I'm 18, I'm graduated. The worst thing he's going to do is kick my ass out. But, he just, he still wasn't on board. He was on me all the time because I was constantly broke, and he knew my banker real well because we were a family friend, and I'd get overdrawn at the bank, and he'd come chew me out for that. And he didn't like me racing, and it wasn't until I finally went to Australia, and I got over there. I was on the USA team, and I sent him a letter. I said, Dad, I know you want me to be a policeman or a lawyer or something that paid really good. I said, but I want to be a racer, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I love to do. And from that point on, I think he understood that that's what I was going to do, and he finally started endorsing it. But for a long time, my dad, he didn't like me racing, didn't want me to race because of the cost.
Shoot, that was 8 years into your racing career. That's what, 87 was your first trip over there?
Yeah, 87. So, the whole time I was racing, I ran that modified the first year, and then I started racing the second year. And unfortunately, at the end of my second year, I was coming home from, I worked 2 jobs to afford to race. I was a steel painter, painting bridges and towers and stuff like that. I was working out at the refinery, but on after hours and weekends, I worked with Bill Lemley right up the road here at A1 Welding, which is just right up here at Parson Creek Road. And we were actually building the grandstands. It used to be Section A and B or whatever these are. These 2 next to the tower.
Okay.
We built, Bill Lemley and I built those grandstands, and we were just getting done, ready to come down and stand them up and assemble them. And I was going home from work one Saturday night. I got hit head on by a drunk driver, and it was bad. I broke my back, broke my jaw and my sternum, and messed me up, so I was out of work on the disabled list for about 1.5 years because of that deal. So that set my racing behind a little bit. But when I got healed up, I come back, and first job I went on was up in North Slope, Alaska, up in Prudhoe Bay, and which long hours, lots of money. So then I bought a sprint car out of California and started putting a sprint car together.
Because 82 was your first year in the sprint car, right?
Actually, I think it was 81, maybe 82.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I know I found video. We've got video of you in 82. I know. I remember the Ross Weiss shot over that I showed you, Eric.
Yeah, I remember. Yep.
The Outlaws ended up finding when they were going through their archives. I don't know, October-ish. I think I sent you a picture. Mm-hmm. That was neat. We'll get that posted at some point to our YouTube channel.
What was your first experience in a sprint car like?
Well, my first sprint car I had power steering, which I'd never had. Those modifieds you ran back in the day, they were heavy. They were tanks, 2,000 plus pounds with manual steering. And I was tough back then. I worked on a farm. I lifted weights. I was a football player, so to me it was like no big deal. I got my first sprint car, and it had power steering. It was like, whoa, this is real easy to race this thing. And, it was just so much more responsive, and driving a modified was like driving a school bus compared to a sprint car. And that's when it really got fun. You could go in and you're carrying enough speed to get some air on the wing and pull the car down into the corner and, really start getting the car to work like it's supposed to. So it was a joy. I knew right then I was where I needed to be.
Was it a big adjustment process to go from that modified to the sprint car, or did it come relatively quick and easy for you?
It wasn't too bad because, I'd been out of racing for a season and a half because of my auto accident. So it'd been quite a while since I drove my modified. And I actually had my older brother drive my car for me a little bit one year, but it just wasn't his thing. So I ended up selling that car. And when I got the sprint car, it'd been 1.5 years since I'd driven. So I was kind of relearning everything. And it was a little bit more of an adjustment because the car was faster. You could actually maneuver the car a lot better. The modified, wherever you went in the corner, that's where you're going to stay. There was no going to the top, cutting down to the bottom, or doing slide jobs, none of that stuff. It was just a totally different handling car.
Do you remember your first sprint car win here?
Yeah. It was June 6th, 1982, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And I had, back in the day, I couldn't afford the 410s or the big motors back then because the 400 Chevrolet only made a cast iron crank, which they wouldn't hold up. 3 or 4 races they'd break.
Okay.
So I always ran a 377. So I'd take a 400 block, put the steel stock 350 cranks in with the thick bearing spacers. So I always ran 377s, which, that's actually a pretty good motor here because they wind up real good and they're fast, but they don't have the brute force that the long stroke motors did back then. So I broke my motor. I needed a motor, and I was becoming friends with Fred Brownfield. We were pretty good friends back then. And he goes, hey, I got a 410 I'll sell you. It's fresh, sitting down there at the engine shop and stuff. And It was a complete 410 motor, fresh, ready to go for $5,500. And so I went to my bank and I said, hey, I need a loan for $5,500, you know, for 6 months, whatever it was going to be. And so I went down and bought the motor and came back and put it in my race car. And it was kind of funny because one of my crewmen was in high school and they were having graduation practice at the high school. My shop was just down the road from the high school. So I pushed it off just to fire the motor up. Well, when I put it in, you have to bend the throttle linkage over to get the valve covers on, because you got to take the valve covers off to get it to frame rails. They were so skinny back then. Well, I didn't bend the throttle plate back up. So when it started, it was about third throttle. I went through this, seriously, in Cedar Woolley, if you ever go to the gym's on one side of the road, the main building's on the other. I went through the school zone at probably 45 miles an hour, open headers, foot on the brake, skid the tires trying to stop that thing. I finally jerked it out of gear, and my crewman, Pat Dillon, he was inside. He goes, I knew when you got the car fired up, I heard you go by. It's like scared the crap out of me because I couldn't stop. But so anyhow, we come up the next night. We didn't qualify back then. I think we lined up by points. And I won the heat race, which put me in the dash. I won the dash. I'm thinking, man, this is really cool. And my buddy Ron Robertson, he was in the dash with me. I went down and tatered him pretty hard getting into turn 3. And he comes up and goes, what the hell's that all about? I said, dude, this thing's way faster than I'm ready for. It got me to the wreck a lot quicker is what it did. But, so we started the main event that night. And, you know, I was in the first couple 3 rows. And I got out, I got in the lead, and, you know, of course, you're so excited and nervous. You're leading a freaking main event. And I remember the white flag come out, and Keith Jensen got up alongside me in turn 1 and 2, and I said, there's no way I'm going to lose this race on the last lap. And, I mean, I hauled it in as hard as I could into 3 and ended up winning that race. And it was like, it was wonderful. You know, I finally won a main event, you know, in a sprint car. And I loaded up that night and went down the next day. There was a race at Cottage Grove. They had a 2-day race down there. And Fred actually went down for the 2-day show, so he didn't know anything about the races the night before. And I saw him. He goes, well, how'd that motor run? I said, well, it ran good enough that I clean sweeped and won my first main event. He was pretty happy for me.
Was your dad at the races that night?
No.
No?
My dad was at the races all the time until I started driving, and I think I made him nervous. I had a little bit of a learning curve, let's just put it that way. And, you know, I think I kind of made him nervous. So he didn't come around. He started coming around a little bit, but not very much.
Okay.
What did it pay to win your first sprint car main event?
$292 and change.
Do you remember what you did with that?
Probably just covered some bounce checks for buying parts, I bet. But, you know, because back then they used to pay off the
front gate
percentage of the crowd is what they paid off of.
I was going to ask you that. I'd heard that.
Yep. Yeah, they paid off on the front gate a percentage, and the weather wasn't real good. There was a small crowd that night, and you always got your check the next week. So when I got my check the next week, you know, I'm all excited to win my first main event, and it was $292 change. I thought I just spent $5,500 on a motor and made less than $300. Pretty smart investment.
Paid off 20% or 5%.
Yeah.
How would that percentage system work? Was it, you know, okay, how did that percentage system work?
Well, it was something to do with, he gave the racers 40% of the first 1,000 and 50% after that's what he paid the racers.
First 1,000
Well, I don't.
Fans, or was it?
No, I think it was the first $1,000 because back then I
Okay.
think the tickets were only, you know, $3, $4, $5 to get in. So he paid 40% of the first $1,000 that came in and 50% after that. And of course, back then, you know, it's like any time. You've always got the racers on one side, the owners and promoters on the other side. They're all saying, "Oh, he's ripping us off," and there's more people up there because you sit in the pits and you swear there's 4,000 people in the stands. There's really like 1,400.
Yeah.
You know, and it stayed that way all the way up until Fred leased the track from the stockholders. And him and I were talking one day, and he was going to keep it that way. I said, "You can't do that." I said, "You got to give him a guaranteed purse." I said, "How many racetracks you ever go to and you don't know what you're racing for?" He goes, "Well," I said, Fred was the first one to give a guaranteed purse when he leased the track in 93.
Okay.
At the end of, he won the championship in 93. So 94 was his first year of leasing the track. And so really, I'm kind of the one that talked him into, given a guaranteed purse. I said, I said, that's the biggest argument people have always had, is that you're ripping them off because there's more people in the grandstands because they don't know how to count. And so Fred went, and I think he paid $1,000 to win the 410s, and I believe it was $700 or $800 to win the 360s back in the day.
That's good.
Yeah, back then it was.
I want to make sure Fred Brownfield, right?
Fred Brownfield,
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm following the names correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's so you get your first win in '82, and then through the '80s you were pretty consistent at Skagit Speedway.
Yeah, but I never stayed here all the time because I like to travel. I wanted to be when I was younger, before the Outlaws, USAC was the big thing, and I always, I want to race USAC someday. When the Outlaws come along, it's like that all changed. So the whole time I'm racing at Skagit, I'm an Outlaw wannabe, and I'd go down to Oregon. I won 16 main events in Oregon in 1 year down there. That's when they started racing Cottage Grove full time, and they were running half a dozen times at Lebanon, Willamette Speedway, and then I'd go over to Montana. They'd run over there. And 1 year, I don't remember which year it was, but I was leading the 410 points here, but they had a 2-day show at Billings. So I talked to the promoter, and he just gave me $400 or $500 tow money, helped me come over there. I went over, and they had main event both days. Then they did kind of like a race of the states where they had all the different Canadian provinces. There was like 10 or 11 of us in the race. I ended up winning all 3 of them. I won both main events plus the race of the states, so I paid pretty good. And I came back and ended up 4th in points that year. So I never really raced for points. I just wanted to, if there's a multiple day race in Oregon, I'd go down and run Lebanon on Friday night, go down to Cottage Grove and run Saturday night, then come home.
So you just said it. USAC was kind of where you wanted to be until you saw the Outlaws. What was it about the Outlaws that made you go, no, I want to go outlaw racing instead of USAC racing, and you did that for 7 years?
Well, probably the biggest thing is I got to race against them. I got to see them in person, and they were wing cars. The non-wing cars looked cool, but the wing cars were faster, and you could hammer them a little harder. You could cowboy up a little harder in the wing cars. And the World Outlaws, once they got going, they just grew so fast, and the name and the people that were racing it and stuff. That's just who I knew I wanted to be with.
Well, that time too, the Outlaws came about in '78. USAC was not maybe the greatest place compared to the Outlaws in '78, where through the early '70s, USAC was strong. The biggest stars in sprint car racing were USAC drivers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because the All-Stars came about in '70, and they got a lot of the USAC guys were kind of going back and forth with the All-Stars and USAC, because the All-Stars ran midweek stuff, and they could double up. Because Jan Opperman was an All-Star champion, and he was still doing a lot of USAC stuff. But then, when the Outlaws came about after the OPEC crisis kind of ended and things settled in, they took off, and USAC was kind of struggling to find their footing. USAC wasn't racing as much either. There were some years in the 80s, I want to say the sprint cars ran less than 20 times.
Yeah, and it's like anything, everything has a shelf life.
Uh-huh.
And USAC had been around. First was AAA back in the day. Then USAC come along. They'd been there for a long time, was getting kind of old, maybe a little stagnant. Then something new come along called the World of Outlaws. And, obviously, the name Outlaws came because back in the day, if you didn't run USAC and you just ran wherever, he's just an outlaw. He don't run with nobody. Well, that's where Ted got the name, the World. He's going to bring all these cowboys together that don't want to follow a certain series. And we're going to call it the World of Outlaws because we're all outlaws because we don't belong to USAC. That's really how the name derived. And, they had the bandana the first year. They had people selling bandanas for souvenirs. And it was just that mystic lifestyle. I think the outlaw lifestyle everybody wanted to live. And USAC was just kind of old, and its shelf life had kind of run a little bit.
The guy I feel kind of bad for in the grand scheme of things is really Bud Miller. He was kind of the idea of the Outlaws really came from Bud that started the All-Stars, and the All-Stars went away when OPEC hit. And, he kind of started the Outlaws and took Bud's idea and blew it up, and Ted ran with it and created just this monster that here we are 50 years later, and it's still chugging along strong as ever, and a great product. And now we're lucky enough to have 2 really good products, and that's something I would talk about with you is we were kind of in the mid 80s there, and you get into 89, you were going to Australia, you were racing. You were kind of getting ready to hit the outlaw trail for a little bit, but 89 was a big year in sprint car racing because that was the first year we had a split. Did USA come out this way?
No, I don't think they came to the West Coast at all.
Okay.
Because I know one of the things when USA came about, and Ted kind of told me this, I was actually really became very good friends with Ted. And he said that, the first thing he did was he picked the phone up, called all of his loyal tracks that he'd been at, and convinced them all to stay with him. He said, look, you've made a lot of money off the World Outlaws. I expect some loyalty here. And that was a big struggling point with USA was, they couldn't get into the premier tracks. They got into Knoxville and stuff because Cappy's son actually worked for USA.
Well, the USA was out of Des Moines. So,
Yeah. All the guys out of Des Moines there. So, so USA took off, and there was one point when in '89, and I was racing, and we went from Ohio or something down to Texas. I didn't have enough money to get to Texas, and USA was running somewhere in Missouri, and my buddy Rich Buback, who's a really good friend of mine.
Rich is great.
Yeah, he was kind of following USA because, he just felt he could make more money there. And I went to this race in Missouri somewhere, and Park Jefferson, I think. Anyhow, I run like 7th that night, and it's like, crap, that was, $1,400, whatever it was. It's like, wow. Well, then they were heading out to Colorado to race, and that's where Rich is from. And he said, just come stay with me. And, they gave me some tow money, so I went out and ran Colorado and did really good out there. And, man, I'm all healed up. And then the Outlaws were headed back up to Peevely, so I pulled into Peevely, and, man, here come Ted Johnson, and he chewed my ass. He goes, where have you been? What are you doing running with them? And I said, Ted, I was broke. I couldn't even buy enough diesel to get to Texas. He goes, if you ever need money to get somewhere, you come and see me. I'll give it to you. And I want to elaborate on that story a little bit because that was the truth. And later that year, we were up at Cedar Lake racing, and there's 23 cars in the pits. I'm going right on. I'm going to make the main event, no problem. Went out, hot lap, and broke a bird cage, left her a bird cage, and freaking sailed her off the track. And, it junked it. It broke the rear end. I was out of parts. I was broke my first year on the Outlaw deal, and broke and dejected. And I got done, and Ted told me to come up the payout window, and they paid me for last place, even though I didn't even take a green flag qualifying. And then Ted asked me what I was going to do. I said, I'm going to go home and, paint a house and sell some stuff, but I'll be back out. He says, are you coming back out? I said, absolutely, Ted. I'm not giving up this easy. I'll be back. It might take me a month. He reached in his pocket. He handed me $400. He said, this isn't to get you home. This is to get you back out. When you're ready to come back out, use my $400 for fuel money. And that's Ted Johnson. A lot of people, they didn't like him, or they thought he was wasn't honest. Ted Johnson was very honest. He just wanted something so bad for everybody. Sometimes he'd tell you what you needed to hear to keep you happy. But that guy, I had all the respect in the world for him, because when push come to shove, he made sure he took care of his family, and that was the racers.
So then what caused, it was the Outlaw USA split, correct? What caused that initial split?
Well, a lot of it was Carl Kinzer, because Carl and I became really good friends too. And Carl kind of mentored me and looked after me, I guess, just to keep me out of his way and safe or something, But Carl told me that they had conversations with Ted, and, God bless Ted. He was an amazing man, but, he gambled a little bit, and he drank a little bit, and, spent a lot of money, and sometimes didn't have the money he needed to take care of his obligations. And, Carl had helped him out a few times, and Carl said, I just went to him and said, you got to change the way you're doing this. This isn't working. And Ted didn't want to change, so a bunch of them got together and had that meeting and decided they're going to go off and start something else. And according to Carl, after they run USA for 2 years, Steve Kinzer announced he was going back to the Outlaws. And I asked Carl why. He said, well, what Carl told me was that U.S. Tobacco offered Steve a bunch of stocks or something in their company if he'd come back to World Outlaws, and he figured he could make more money there. So he told Carl he was going back to the Outlaws with or without him. Well, without Steve Kinzer on that tour, it was going to fade real quick. So that was kind of the ending of USA, was when Steve announced he was going back to the Outlaws. And Ted knew he needed him back, because he was the face of the World of Outlaws. So that's kind of what, and the fact that they just weren't making a lot of money because they weren't getting into the prime racetracks. Other than Knoxville, they weren't really hitting the really good racetrack.
And U.S. Tobacco Skoal.
Copenhagen Skoal, yeah.
That
was
the title sponsor.
Is that why it was the U.S.?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, when Copenhagen Skoal was a title sponsor, they figured out how they could get Steve Kinzer back. And Steve's a smart businessman. He looked at the money on everything. He was most incredible driver. Thinks it's awesome I got to race against him, but he was a businessman. Everything he looked at was how much money am I going to make on this deal, whether I do it or not.
You mentioned Steve. What was he like to race against?
Fierce. I mean, that guy could be in third or fourth place in points going into August, and his endurance and his drive was so incredible. Most of the time, he would pass everybody in points from mid-August on. And he was just such a fierce competitor. But, you know, when I gave him his award here the last year he was out here on his farewell tour, I gave Dana a really nice vase I had all painted up and done up for her. Because I told him, I said, Steve Kinzer was going to be a great racer, but I said, you made him an incredible racer. Because Dana's drive, you know, she was an Olympic level runner. I mean, she gave up her Olympic trials to support Steve in his racing. She was an amazing runner. And we were at a track one time, and Steve he was in a slump. He hadn't won for 3 or 4 nights.
Yeah.
You know, one of those slumps. I remember him walking down through the pits, and Stevie, his daughter, was on one hand. She's crying. Steve's just pissed off. He's just got this, get out of your, you know, he got the look on his face like you don't even want to get around this guy. And Dana's right there walking with him. And I remember her looking at him saying, do you even know how to win anymore? She goes, answer me. I'm talking to you. Do you even know how to win anymore? He goes, yes. She goes, and you better start acting like it. I mean, she was the driving force behind Steve Kinzer, that when he was at his best, she'd put him right back up there.
Wow.
Amazing. The other philosophy I have on Steve Kinzer, too, is he's a real good golfer, you know. And there's something I figured out. It seems like really good race car drivers are really good golfers. And my theory on that is when you're racing, you got to concentrate every lap, whether it's for 40 laps on a 3/10 mile track or 500 laps on a 500 miles on a super speedway. You can't lose your concentration. Well, to be a good golfer, you've got to keep that same concentration for 18 holes. You lose your concentration, you shank it. So I always think there's a correlation to be why a lot of good racers like to golf, because it exercises their mind and their brain on how to focus for a long period of time.
That's going to be my next reason for when I shake my next golf ball. I lost my focus there.
Well,
Thank you. I think that's really true, though. I think that's a way I've never thought of it, but I think that's true.
Yeah.
Is that mental focus of playing 18 holes is similar to running 30 laps.
you're-
I've never driven, so I don't know, but just from what it seems like.
Yeah, when you're in a sprint car, I mean, it's like you're not running a marathon like cup cars do and stuff like that, but it's a sprint. I mean, it's all out, full endurance. You've got to be in good shape. And, you know, it's kind of funny. Steve invited me to come by his shop sometime if I need a place to work on my car, so I stopped in because you get invited by Steve Kinzer, you take him up on it.
Yeah.
And I'm out there dinking around in my trailer. He come out, had his jogging outfit on. Swear to God, true story. He's got a cigarette in one hand and a cocktail like a sippy cup in the other hand. He goes, Dana said, I got to go run. I'll be back. So he jogs down the road to the bar, fills his drink back up, and jogs back. True story. I mean, this guy's cigarette in one hand, a cocktail in the other, and he takes off and runs 4 or 5 miles, whatever it was, halfway down to the bar, halfway back. But that guy was he was so mentally tough. And you get him to the racetrack, he's kind of like Sammy. People think they're not real nice people because they don't want to talk to you at the racetrack. But you get them away from the racetrack, and we were talking motorhomes one day when I got ready to buy my bus because it was kind of like his. I couldn't get away from him. I mean, 45 minutes later, he's still telling me about the bus and all the things with that. And same with Sammy. You know, I had dinner one night, and he was there, and him and Amy come and joined us at our table. And he's actually, you get a couple drinks in Sammy, he's freaking hilarious. The guy's really funny.
But, I mean, Tony would always tell me when working for him for 10 years before I came out here, like, the racetrack, you're working. Like, this is how Steve, Sammy, Doug, how they, you, that's how you made your money. That was your job. And your income was completely, strictly tied to your performance on the racetrack. So if the performance lacked, you weren't making money. It wasn't guaranteed income.
And that's what they look at. And Steve Kinzer, like I said, he likes to make money. He likes money. And he's going to do whatever he's going to do to win money. And we ran that, the Fram Nationals, or whatever they called it, there in Tennessee at the end of the year. And Sammy ended up winning it, but Steve was right in the front, and I was, 8th or 9th, something like that. And on a restart, Steve got shuffled back 4 or 5 spots. he went down in the corner, and I want to say it was Rocky Hodges. I don't remember exactly, but he freaking blasted right in the tail tank and spun him out. Yellow flag. Guess what? Steve got his spot back up around second. 'Cause he'd faded back to about fourth or fifth because he got shuffled out of the way, and he went right down there and freaking blasted Hodges and turned him around, and because he knew if he got a yellow, he'd restart. He gets his start spot back.
His spot back, yeah.
Yeah.
What was it like racing back then? I mean, you look at the guys you had to race against in the late 80s. I mean, it was incredible. You had Steve, Sammy, and Wolfgang at the absolute top of their game. And then a guy that I think gets overlooked way too often in sprint car racing because, he retired early, but two, he was an incredible racer, Bobby Davis Jr.
Yep.
He gets overlooked so much.
Yep.
But
Bobby Davis and I became friends, and his dad was really nice to me. And my first year on the trail out there, I don't know, his dad must have liked me or something, but he gave me a couple of his Bobby Davis electric shirts.
Yep.
They're red with the yellow on them. I always wore that shirt under my driver's suit. That was my good luck shirt.
Oh, that's cool.
I told myself I need a couple more. This one's getting a little stale, you know. And when I got hurt in '92, I mean, he sent me a big old ham in the mail, I guess, because that's what they do when you're in Tennessee. You send them some food to make sure they get to eat and stuff like that. But, Bobby Davis was really good. Dave Blaney was really good back in that day, too. He was really good.
7C car.
But with Verlin Chupsteel. And you didn't realize the history you were involved with at the time. You just know that you're racing against the toughest three race car drivers that ever walked on this earth.
Yep.
And some of their battles were just legendary. But I became friends with all of them, and they all helped me out a lot. And I got crashed at Eldora one year. Danny Smith and somebody else crashed right in front of me, right past the flag stand, and I couldn't miss him. I got into him and did a couple of endos. Seriously, before I got back to my pit, this girl standing in my pit area, she introduced me. She goes, "I'm Casey Luna's daughter," and he said, "Come down. He's got a top wing for you and some spare parts." It's like, really? My car's still on the hook out in the track, and there's already people coming over to make sure I got parts to get my car fixed. It broke the frame, and I took it down to Lee Osborne's shop, and we straightened it and welded it back together. And I kept going with it, but that's just how people were. And Kenny Woodruff, I'd go down and say, "You got any good used tires?" He goes, "Yeah, I want $200, but you got to take all of them." And I'd clean the whole top of his trailer because they always throw the used tires on top. And there's probably 25 tires up there, and I'd pick the worst ones and sell them for $15 or $20 a piece and make my money back, and I'd end up with a bunch of good used tires. So they really, I think after the first few races, my first year out there, you're just another guy out there getting in the way. But after they saw me heading back east, went to Little Rock for a race, and then from there back to Memphis. And I think they saw then that I was going to stay with them. They started talking to you more, and they started, becoming friends with you more. Hod was out there. I think he's driving for Daryl Socher, I believe, that year, and the Coors Extra Gold car.
The 8, because that was they changed the number. Daryl changed his number that year.
Yeah. And so more and more of them started, helping you and, making sure you're okay. And you kind of slowly get accepted into the family once you prove you're really going to be there.
Uh-huh.
What was the biggest piece of advice or biggest thing you learned from whether it was Steve or Sammy or whoever while on your time with the tour?
Just being prepared. That was the biggest thing because, I had a above average racing operation for here at Skagit Speedway, and I took that on the road. I mean, I didn't belong out there with the budget I had, but it's what I wanted to do. I'd sleep in my truck. Somebody offers you a free meal or a place to wash your clothes, you take them up on it. But my biggest thing is I just didn't have the money out there to race the way I wanted to race. And I always had young kids that most of them had no experience. I'd take them out there, and the standard deal was $200 a week, and I buy your pit passes and I help you with a few meals. And as soon as they start getting pretty good, somebody else would hire them for $250 or $300 a week, and I'd lose them. So there was a lot of times I'd show up at the racetrack by myself because I had no crew, because I either lost a crewman because somebody outbid me for them or I couldn't afford one. So being prepared, all the preparation that you do in the parking lot before you go to the racetrack. The car is done, every tire is aired up, every tire is chalk marked. You put them in your tire rack from small to large, and the tire that's on the car, you pull it out. So everything to the left of the hole is smaller, everything to the right of the hole is bigger. You color-coded your wrenches, and you lay them out in the back by the trailer, because if you got to tell somebody, go get me the blue wrench, that was the 9/16, or get me the yellow one, that's the 3/4 or 5/8, whatever. being prepared. When my cars got to the racetrack, I dropped the back door down. I'd roll it out. I'd put the wing up. I'd put my tires on. I always reblocked them just from bouncing in the trailer. But I was ready when there's none of this timing them or changing bars or gears. Or when I got to a racetrack, I was ready as soon as it rolled out of the trailer. And that was the biggest thing that I learned was being prepared.
I want to go I know it's been a happy conversation. I think as we continue to kind of work through your career into the 90s, a darker moment that I think is a pivotal moment in sprint car racing history, honestly, was the Doug Wolfgang crash. That you experienced that. You were right there.
Yeah.
Do you remember the thought process that you went through when Doug's
Absolutely.
crash and then you're diving into his car that's engulfed in flames?
I see it as plain today as I did 25 years ago. I mean, it's fortunately, before I went racing full time, I was a fireman in Cedar Woolley for about 10 years. And, being a firefighter and going to school, and all, you learn, think, don't panic. You learn about, stuff like that. And I taught auto extrication, so I've seen some horrible stuff in my lifetime. But that day, we were on the asphalt down there, and I just wasn't getting around real good. And partway through practice, they had a press conference up they had a closed-in section up above. So we're sitting up there, and I was sitting next to Doug, and I told him, I said, man, this thing ain't rolling the corners very good. He goes, what session are you in? I said, I'm in the first session. We go back out. He goes, well, I'm in the second one. He says, I think you're entering wrong. He says, come out, watch me on my session. So I jumped out of the car, rode my quad right up there where you push on the track and turn forward. I'm watching Doug the whole time, and he got held up behind a couple guys in front of him. Were side by side. He just couldn't get around them. So he threw the checkered. These guys slowed down. Doug went around him and just gassed her because he hadn't been up to speed that good. Down into 1 and 2, down the backstretch, and he was flying pretty good. He gets into turn 3 and 4. About midway through the turn, the back of the car stepped out just a little bit, which on the asphalt, as soon as you burp the throttle or do anything, it locks it back down in whatever direction you're aimed, it's going that way. And he got the back out a little bit, and it come down. They had them giant uke tires. The left front hit the uke tire, did a big wheel stand, which broke the left front off, and it come down. It just slammed down on the track, and his foot went full bore on the throttle, and it went 3/4 angle straight into the fence, wide open. And when he hit that fence, I'd been at Indy one time during practice, and I heard one of the cars hit the fence, just that crushing metal sound. That's exactly what it sounded like. I knew it was bad. He hit the fence, I knew it was bad. I ran over and jumped on my quad and started hauling ass down the front stretch, and I could see the car. There was a little fire underneath the back of the car. I'm going, okay, he's got a little fire, let's get it out. They had no fire crew there. It was horrible. They had one fire guy there with full bunker gear. They had a friend of his there that had a driver's suit on, and none of them had gloves, none of them had headgear. They ran out with a little 5-pound bottle. I still remember the size of the bottle. And he stuck the nozzle right up under the car and turned it on, which you don't do that. You fog it when you come in to pull the flames down. When he shot it under the car, it blew fuel everywhere. And this fire went from a little fire to this huge fire now. And there's no fire extinguishers. And I didn't have any gloves. I went in to try to get the steering wheel off and instantly burnt the crap out of my hands because the fire was so hot so quick up inside the cockpit, because on the asphalt they made you run a full belly pan so no oil would drip on the track. Well, when it broke the fuel filter inside the cockpit, all that fuel's running right down into that pan. You're sitting in a frying pan. And the flames were rolling up around his legs, and I tried to get the steering wheel off. It was so hot it instantly burnt my fingers, and I couldn't get any gloves. Finally, working Woody, he found a pair of gloves somewhere. Art did. He gave me the gloves, and somebody else threw me a head sock. By then, Mark had come out on the track, and he was yelling, get the tow truck over here. This is how long he sat in that fire. They had enough time to back a tow truck up, hook onto the front bumper, and drag him out of the pool of fuel he's sitting in. And I remember how his body was just bouncing lifeless down the track, and we're chasing it. We got in there. We got him up about 6 inches or so out of the seat, and I seen the fire follow the car right up. The flame just come right up the track, and when it went up the next time, it blew fuel on me. My suit's on fire. I'm getting burned, and I had to get out of it. And a guy named Roger Lee's camp, I remember all this stuff. Roger Lee's camp, he was right there, and he's out there on his hands and knees with these rags trying to put my suit out. And Jerry, Doug's wife, come up, and she was screaming. She's eight and a half months pregnant. She's just screaming and stamping her feet. She just says, get him out of there, for God's sakes, get him out of the car. It's like I was scared. I thought, man, this guy, he ain't going to make it. And what do? You just got to go back in. And then I was able to get the seat pulled back. Mark was on one side, I was on the other. We finally got the corner because luckily Doug ran hunt seats back in the day because they're really light, but they're single wall. So we got the seat bent back. We were able to grab him and pull him out of the car and took him over and laid him on the ground. They documented that when the accident first happened, they called in medical. They said, we got a really bad one out here. When they sent a helicopter right away, and when they documented that we got the driver out, he's on the ground, was 7 minutes after the initial call. I mean, all this went through the court deal. I mean, it's all documented. And I went to work on his legs. He was burned really bad. And the one guy in the fireman, he was working on his face because his shield melted in on his nose and stuff. And he's trying to get his helmet off. And I got some scissors and I cut he was burned clear through on one shoe and burned through on one knee. You can see the bone and everything. His kneecap was exposed. And I cut the driver's suit off and I went, thank God he had underwear on, the fireproof underwear. I thought, man, it's in pretty good shape. It's going to not be too bad. I cut this underwear off and the skin, everything just slid off the leg. And I knew he was in big trouble then. And how bad it was, they were bringing ice out of the concession stand. They couldn't even get the flag stand gate open because it was locked. They're throwing the ice up to somebody in the flag stand. He's throwing it down to somebody on the track. They're throwing it on the car trying to put the fire out because they're announcing, if you got fire extinguishers in the pits, please bring them out here. There's no damn fire extinguishers there. And so they had this ice, and I just started packing his legs in ice because you had to get the heat out. Otherwise, it just would continue to cook, and if it gets in the bone, you're done.
Yep.
And behind the racetrack was a concrete plant. They had enough time to call the concrete plant, and they sent a concrete mixer truck over. He come out and pulled up once we had Doug on the ground, and he brings his washdown hose over, which, it's got every germ in the world in it. And I yelled at Art Melees. I said, get that effing hose out of here. I don't want nothing sprayed on him. But that's how much time they had from the time the accident happened to get this guy to drive his truck all the way out there. We first got him out. And, packed his legs, and he started to move his legs a little bit, which I said, well, that's a good sign. But once they finally got him loaded in the helicopter and left, and then I had to go in the hospital because I had blisters on my hands and down on my inside of one ankle where it burned my suit up. And we didn't have internet back then, and so I called my dad, and I said, hey, I just want you to hear this from me before it gets out. So there's a bad one here today. I said, Wolfie got burned up. And he goes, what happened? I told him. I said, I got burnt a little bit. I'm fine, Dad. Everything's going to be fine. I've just burned my hands and my leg a little bit. And I told him, I said, I've never seen anybody in my life burnt that bad that lived. I was worried that he wasn't going to live.
Yeah, here we are, 2025, 33 years later, and Doug's still.
I'll tell you why he lived. I'll tell you exactly why Doug Wolfgang lived through that. There was nobody out there that was in better physical condition than Doug Wolfgang.
I've heard that from a couple of people because he would run and work out like crazy.
He'd sit there, he'd go down by the pool, his wife would sit on his feet, and he'd do 100 sit-ups. And he's the one that taught me jumping jacks is probably the best exercise for racers because it does your neck, your shoulders, your upper body, your endurance, everything. And, he said you got to do about 1,000 jumping jacks every day if you want to really be a good race car driver, which I got to that point after a while. But Doug was in such incredible physical condition that when the pneumonia set in and all that stuff, his body was healthy enough. There's no doubt in my mind the reason Doug Wolfgang is alive now is because he was in such good physical condition back then.
Do you remember when you were running Knoxville at that point in the mid 90s when Doug made his comeback in the model car and was he 96 I want to say won like 30-some 360 sprint car races in the Midwest.
He won a lot of stuff. When he first came back, he was in an IMCA sprint car up at Huset's.
Yep.
And it was kind of funny because they had a motor claim back then. They were using the Speedway Motors cars. He said pretty much every week he'd went up there and they could keep their ignition and something else. I don't remember what it was now. And he said he just pull the motor out and sell it and get another one. But he told me what he was doing with those engines, why they ran so good, which he didn't give. You keep your ignition and your fuel system. That's what it was. But I won a race up there in I want to say 96 or something like that. And it was a weekly show, and I won. The first guy out there on the front stretch when I pulled up to stop was Doug Wolfgang. I didn't even have my belts off yet. He reached in and slaps me in the helmet, gives me a big hug. He said, This is what life's all about, ain't it?
June 2nd, 1996.
Yeah, okay. And, but yeah, he comes up, slaps me in the helmet, and he's in there giving me a big hug, yelling at me. He goes, this is what life's all about, ain't it? And it's like, wow, that was so cool. And yeah, pretty special. And, he come back and started racing, and
he won that night. Too. Doug won that night.
I forgot that part, but I know when he tried to come back earlier, he went down to Texas or Devil's Bowl or somewhere, and he went out hot lapped or whatever he did. And he went home. He said, I wasn't ready, but he come back in Motter's car. Then he got hurt at Granite City, and at that point, because he didn't have a down tube car, and he took that car right in the cage. He cheated death twice, and he figured that was probably enough. Broke his neck and stuff like that. He figured that was probably enough.
Yeah, there was 96. He had 21 wins and 33 starts.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Jackson, Husitz, pretty much, mostly
yeah.
up in north.
And he was running that. I think they call them IMCA sprint cars.
Yeah,
They're kind of like our sportsman division is out here. Yeah, he was running that
limited 360 almost.
Yeah, he was just doing really good, and he told me a few things to do at Husitz, which we ended up winning a race. So.
Yeah, I don't feel like that is talked about enough, but that was that crash, I think, changed the scope of racing at the local level, the sprint car level. Like it made us prepared for, an ambulance was present pretty much from there on out now, and that lawsuit and everything changed the trajectory of sprint car racing and put us in a much better place. And unfortunately, it was,
Yeah, it was at a huge expense.
Arguably the greatest race car driver to ever live on dirt.
Yeah, he was definitely, and he told me, he says, I would have never done the lawsuit because he said, you can hate me like everybody else. I said, I don't hate you, Doug. I know why you're doing the lawsuit. He says, they weren't prepared. He says, I just want to make it better. If my son ever races, or he says, they weren't prepared for the accident. And he said, I told Ted I wouldn't do the lawsuit if he would guarantee me they'd get a safety rig out there. And Ted says they weren't going to do that. So he said, I went through with the lawsuit. And, I had to go through the depositions and go through all that stuff. I seen all the pictures, and it was just an ugly time in our sport, but it's something that had to be done. And, I told Doug, I fully understand that. And it was just crazy that I just about fist fought several people. We'd be somewhere and they'd start trash talking them. And I would not stand for it. It's like, first off, you weren't there. You didn't see what really went on. And there was one well-known TV broadcaster. I'm not going to bring up names. He's deceased now. Doesn't matter. I was at the PRI show one year. And he was standing with a bunch of, dignitaries, whatever. I come walking by and I saw him and hello, did cordials and stuff like that. He introduced me. Everybody goes, hey, guys, this is Steve Beitler. He's the one that saved Doug Wolfgang's life so he could come back and sue everybody. I looked at him and I said, are you effing for real? Did you really just say that? That's the last time I ever talked to the man. I just walked off. I just could not believe he said that. And I was just shocked. And but I totally got why Doug did it. I totally endorsed it. And Ted was pretty unhappy with me until finally one day I just went to his office and I said, look, we've been friends too long. I got to tell you why. And I talked to him and I told him. He goes, well, he kind of understood, and then he was fine after that. But and Fred was protecting his brand. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. But in the article they wrote about that, I think his name was Cooch or something like that. He was the defense attorney. Right in the article, they quoted him saying, look, you need to make your racetracks safer because they just proved that the waiver's not going to save your racetracks. It's like, hallelujah, this is exactly what Doug was preaching. This is the defense that was trying to show he was negligent, and he's the one telling the racetracks in the article, you need to make your racetracks safer because the waiver's not going to save you. Like Doug said, he goes, I accept the fact. Yeah, I signed the waiver. He says, I accept it. It was my fault, 100% my fault, direct. But it's their fault they weren't prepared afterwards.
It changed everything. I mean, I sit here and I worked for a series for 10 years, and that was one of the things, the All-Stars. There was a couple races where we delayed the start of a race because we were waiting for the ambulance to get there because that was in our contract. And the Outlaws had the same thing, so it wasn't just us.
I mean, because we always thought we were invincible until you're proven you're not.
Yep. Unfortunately, it took that incident to really...
Well, I've always been being a
shape
firefighter and stuff, I've always been a big stickler on fires. And when I first bought Skagit, oh gosh, I can't. What's the guy's name from Edmonton? His son Ron Hodgson. He was involved with IHRA quite a bit. Well, he had a manufacturing company, and they built NHRA and IHRA approved fire units to slip in the back of a truck. So that's where the one we had here. I don't think they're using it anymore, but that's where it came from. Ron built it for me and brought it down because I didn't ever want anything to happen here at Skagit Speedway to my racers that happened to Doug or anybody else. I wanted to be prepared if we ever had a fire. And thank God we never had anything bad like that in the 20 years.
Welcome back, everybody. That was a good chat with Steve Beitler. We knew it would be good with Steve. I mean, I've known Steve a long time, and he's a really, really good guy. It was interesting to listen to. He had a lot of good stuff to say there, Erik.
Yeah, that was, Blake and I were talking, as good of an interview. I learned so much. I mean, I was just sitting there trying to absorb everything. And it's one of these episodes, I think, where I might want to go back in just a week or two and just re-listen to it, because I think there's things that you'll pick up the first time, and then there's things, that can be picked up the second and maybe even a third time listening, just because he was so in-depth and so well-spoken and can elaborate on different things. I mean, the Doug Wolfgang thing, I didn't know a lot about, so hearing him talk about it and be able to go in depth was a true learning experience for me.
Steve raced in my opinion, one of the most interesting times in sprint car racing. The way things were changing, there was so much happening. The Outlaws were still in their infancy. Sprint car racing was really starting to boom. We were rolling into the live TV era of sprint car racing. Towards the end of, right after Steve finished racing, is really when TNN picked up on the live TV coverage. These big sponsorships were coming into the game. So, and then in the part 2 of this episode that'll come out in a couple days, you'll hear Steve talk about the ownership of Skagit Speedway, and that's an interesting era of Steve really helping get Skagit Speedway get back on its feet.
Yeah, and that was just as interesting as racing, because as detailed as you are in racing, or as detailed it seemed like Steve was in racing, he was detailed and organized and thoughtful in how he owned and ran Skagit Speedway, and then, even Grace Harbor and Yakima and the other assets that he had was really interesting to hear him talk about, because that is a lot of different things you have to run. I mean, running a sprint car team is one thing. Running a racetrack and assets, I think there's probably some similarities, but there's so many probably differences too. So that was just really interesting to hear him talk about that.
It was very good. I think you'll enjoy part 2 just as much as you enjoy part 1. I enjoy part 1 a lot just because the history of sprint car racing is so fascinating to me. It's like I tell Dave Argerbright, who just came out with a fantastic book about Steve Kinzer, and we talked a lot about Steve in this part of the episode. So check that book out if you're looking for something over the holidays.
What's the book called?
It's just called Kinzer.
Okay.
It's a really good read. I've got it sitting on my nightstand right now as I'm kind of working my way through it. But yeah, I've told Dave several times I think it'd be fascinating for him to do a book on sprint car racing. Just, we talked about the USA split, and then you get into 2006 and Fred Brownfield starts the NST, the National Sprint Tour. Now, a lot of people up here, NST is Northern Sprint Tour. Well, he had the NST that the rest of us in the world knew as the National Sprint Tour. And, that was another split in the sport. And there was such an interesting era in the early 2000s, too, because live TV, Ted selling the Outlaws.
Yep.
But that'd be a fascinating era. And then, Steve talked about bringing the Outlaws back here for the first time in I think, it was more than 10 years the Outlaws didn't come to the Pacific Northwest. So there's a lot in both of these episodes.
Oh, 100%.
You're gonna enjoy listening, and it's gonna be, I don't know, a nice way to get through the holidays, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Whether you're traveling or sitting at home.
Yep, and family friendly, you can listen to with your kids, so that was enjoyable. And Steve was enjoyable, as I knew he would be. But sprint car racing, the news and notes has been kind of slow this past week, Erik.
Couple things.
Not a lot happening. A little bit slower.
It's like a Chili's.
Yeah, you mean
coming on board with
Flow, but Chili's is pretty big involvement with dirt track racing right now. I think that's just another little caveat to their deal. But the shootout entries were over 1,950 entries. Chili Bowl's at 373. That's business is booming there, and that's where, you'll have a week or two of episodes without me because I'll be down at shootout, and then
so shootouts. Shootout's next week, right?
Yeah, starts
So
the 30th.
We'll
so
probably take New Year's
yeah, just take
off.
that off,
and then
come
we'll
back.
have.
We'll take that off and come back the first week of January, which
Yeah.
I'll be back for, and then Chili Bowl week you can do something.
Yeah,
with
we'll have.
JY.
I think we have JY, and we'll.
Yeah, that'll be entertaining.
But probably talk a different aspect of the sport, I think, with JY and maybe some media stuff and just different coverage of the sport. We'll kind of work some of those later down the road. But listen to the first episode of 2026. That'll be fun.
That'll be a unique episode.
Yeah,
and
I think
something
so.
I feel like you and JY could dive in a little bit deeper than me, just because I've been out of that aspect of the world since I graduated college, really, which is same thing as you, but I just haven't sat down at a laptop and edited anything for 13 years now. But that'll be fun, and it will be. And then I'll get back and we'll have a full recap of.
I look forward to that with you.
Chili Bowl, and we'll find a guest and we'll keep rolling along. And we talk about at the end of the second episode that you'll hear in a couple of days. We'll have Mark Harrison on. We're going to work with Mark. I know Mark told Steve he'd do it, and I have Mark's number now, and we'll get Mark on. I think he's got a lot to say. And Steve mentioned at the end of the second episode that you'll hear in a couple of days that Mark worked for 3 different regimes here at Skagit Speedway. So that'll be interesting to talk to him about.
Yeah. And on the Sprint Car news and notes thing, too, one thing I wrote down, James McFadden.
Yeah.
We'll be back in the Tarleton Motorsports car for an extended schedule in 2026. Coming off 7 wins and 29 starts, they're looking. A potential for 50 races for him next year in the Tarleton Motorsports car. I think that'll be a lot of fun. I would imagine, I haven't seen their schedule. It'll probably include coming back to Dirt Cup and coming back to Skagit Speedway. So a guy we've seen run really well at Skagit Speedway, a partnership that's been really strong last year. It'll be fun to see that continue again.
I think he'll be one of the, another one of the guys you can expect to compete for a Dirt Cup. I think he had a tough Dirt Cup last year, but he showed speed. It just came at the very end of Saturday night, unfortunately. And then they also announced that Colby Copeland will be in that car part-time. So that'll be, Colby's a long-time racer here on the West Coast, and he's one of the promoter. He runs the day-to-day operation at Silver Dollar Speedway in Chico, California. I would say by the time the next episode comes out, the NARC schedule will probably be out, and I would guess our Skagit schedule will be right in there too. So we're knocking on the door, just kind of putting the finishing touches on a couple of things there. So soon it's in the process. Then we can start to work on season tickets and big event tickets. So if you're looking for that kind of stuff, certainly let us know. We've got plenty of merchandise for sale on the website, SkagitSpeedway.com. Shop, hit the shop logo, and has some stuff on sale. So if you're looking for some sale shirts, we've got you covered there. You get your mom a Christmas ornament for the holidays, Erik. But yeah, it was a great 2025.
Yes.
I'm excited to see what 2026 has in store, and that's when we'll be back with our next really full episode is 2026. We've got another episode coming that's really part 2 of our chat with Steve, because we went a couple hours.
Yeah, I think this one, we're recording on a Tuesday. The tentative thought, and Blake and I will chat a little bit more, is this one will come out probably Christmas Eve, so tomorrow, December 24th. And then thinking part 2 probably Friday, which would be the 26th, I think.
That works well. I think
so you kind of have you have Christmas break, but it's still fresh in your mind. It kind of was your to part 1.
Then you're not a huge gap between them. So we'll come back real quick with that second episode. So just know that when you finish the Steve Beitler episode, there's another one coming in a couple of days if you're listening to this on Christmas Eve. Hope everyone has a great Christmas, great New Year. I can't believe how fast this year went. Christmas came up as quick. I fly home tomorrow morning back to Iowa.
Safe travels for you.
Bright and early, and hope you have a good Christmas here.
You too. Yeah.
We'll be back with more in 2026, and by the time we come back, we'll have a lot to talk about. I
look forward to that.
Our next episode where it's you and I, so that'll be good. But appreciate everyone listening. Share the podcast if you can. Help us grow this. Like our YouTube. Make sure to like and subscribe. That really helps us. I know that's kind of the cliche thing, but that tells YouTube you like the content you're watching and are listening to, and helps us kind of grow this podcast and continue to grow Skagit Speedway. And that's the ultimate goal, is to continue to grow this racetrack.
And you can follow Skagit Speedway on all social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, and YouTube, all at Skagit Speedway. Well, with that, it's been an enjoyable 2025. Happy holidays, everyone. We'll see you in 2026. Take care.